The lye-thick water didn't just ruin Bianca's million-dollar couture, it started eating her skin. But as the bride of the century clawed at my throat in front of 200 guests, she didn't find jewelry. She found a copper locket welded to a circuit under my skin. The water in the fountain's basin was cold enough to burn. Elena Blackwood pressed her knees against the damp stone rim, her raw hands submerged in the chemical-laced liquid, scrubbing at a century of accumulated grime. Above her, through the cascade of sculpted marble cherubs, the lights of the grand ballroom blazed with a violence she could feel against her eyelids. The engagement of the century was in full swing, and she was 3 hours into her shift with 5 more to go. Her uniform, a threadbare gray dress with a white apron, clung to her thin frame, already damp from the fountain's spray. The fabric smelled of lye and old sweat, a stark contrast to the perfume-thick air drifting down from the patio. She kept her head low, her dark hair pinned back with utilitarian precision, her movements mechanical. Scrub, rinse, scrub again. The routine was a kind of meditation, a way to silence the memories that threatened to surface whenever she paused. The estate's fountain was a monstrosity of Gilded Age excess. 3 tiers of marble rose 15 feet into the air, water cascading from weeping cherub mouths into the massive basin where Elena worked. Under the spotlights, the upper level sparkled like diamonds, but here at the bottom, the water was murky with runoff, the stones slick with black silt. The basin collected everything the estate wanted to hide: cigarette butts, champagne corks, the occasional piece of expensive jewelry dropped by careless guests. Elena's fingers closed around something sharp. She pulled it free, a broken piece of Venetian glass, probably from one of the dessert plates. She set it carefully on the rim beside her bucket. Her hands were calloused, the skin cracked from constant exposure to cleaning agents, but they moved with a strange precision. A pianist's hands, someone had once said, before the fire took everything worth remembering. From the ballroom, 200 yards away, music poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Vivaldi, played by a live orchestra. Elena could see the guests through the glass, a sea of silk and diamonds moving in synchronized patterns. The bride-to-be, Bianca Vance, stood at the center of the room in an ivory gown worth more than Elena's annual wages. Her blonde hair was styled in elaborate curls, her makeup applied with professional precision. She moved through the crowd like a queen, accepting congratulations with practiced smiles. Elena returned her attention to the stone. She didn't need to watch. She had memorized every detail of Bianca's face years ago, the way soldiers memorize the faces of their enemies. The sharp cheekbones, the calculating blue eyes, the way her mouth twisted when she was delivering cruelty disguised as concern. Bianca was the girl who had everything Elena should have had, and she wore it like armor. A shadow fell across the fountain. Elena froze, her shoulders tensing automatically. Guests weren't supposed to wander this far from the patio, but alcohol had a way of dissolving boundaries. "Excuse me." The voice was male, slurred with expensive wine. "Do you have a towel?" Elena lifted her head carefully, her expression neutral. The guest was middle-aged, his tuxedo rumpled, his face flushed red. He swayed slightly, one hand braced against the fountain's edge for balance. "The staff entrance is behind the rose garden, sir," Elena said, her voice low and measured. "They can help you there." "I don't need help, I need a towel." He leaned forward, and Elena caught the sour smell of champagne on his breath. "What's your name?" "Elena, sir." "Elena." He repeated it with exaggerated care. "Pretty name. You know, you should smile more. Girls like you should." He never finished the sentence. His foot, slick with spilled champagne from the patio, slid on the wet stone. He lurched sideways, arms windmilling, and crashed directly into Elena. The impact sent her sprawling backward, her bucket of soapy gray water tipping over as she fell. The water arced through the air in slow motion, catching the light from the ballroom windows. Elena's hands scrambled for purchase on the slick marble, but her fingers found nothing. She hit the basin hard, her shoulder striking the stone with a sharp crack of pain. Cold water closed over her head, filling her mouth with the taste of chemicals and rot. She surfaced, gasping, her vision blurred. Through the cascade of fountain spray, she could see the patio erupting in chaos. The bucket's contents had drenched Bianca's gown, the chemical-laden water spreading across the ivory silk in a dark, irreversible stain. The music stopped abruptly. Conversations died. The silence was so complete Elena could hear water dripping from her hair onto the stone. Bianca stood frozen, her arms held away from her body, staring down at her ruined dress. The custom couture, hand-sewn in Milan, a masterpiece of lace and beadwork, was destroyed. The chemicals were already eating through the delicate fabric, leaving dark holes where the embroidery had been. The shock lasted 3 heartbeats. Then Bianca's head snapped up, her eyes locking onto Elena with a hatred so pure it felt like a physical force. You. The word was a hiss, a promise of violence. Bianca's heels clicked against the stone as she stormed down from the patio, her entourage parting like water before her. Elena tried to stand, her legs shaking beneath her. She opened her mouth to explain, to apologize, but the words died in her throat. There was no explanation Bianca would accept, no apology that would satisfy. They both understood this was about more than a ruined dress. Bianca reached the fountain in 5 strides. Her hand shot out, fingers twisting into Elena's hair with brutal efficiency. She yanked upward, forcing Elena's head back, exposing her throat to the watching crowd. Pain exploded across Elena's scalp, white-hot and blinding. "Do you have any idea," Bianca said, her voice a low hiss meant only for Elena's ears, "how much this gown cost? How long it took to make?" Her grip tightened, pulling harder. "Of course you don't. People like you can't comprehend value." Elena's hands came up automatically, grasping at Bianca's wrist, but she didn't fight. Fighting would only make it worse. She forced her breathing to slow, her expression to empty. Disappear. Become invisible again. Survive. Look at me when I'm speaking to you. Bianca's other hand came up, gripping Elena's chin, forcing eye contact. "You think you can destroy my night and hide behind your pathetic." She stopped. Her gaze had dropped to Elena's neck, where a thin copper chain held a dull, industrial-looking locket. The piece was ugly by Bianca's standards, tarnished metal, no gemstones, no delicate filigree. It looked like something salvaged from a factory, more mechanical than decorative. Bianca's eyes narrowed. "What is this trash?" "Please," Elena whispered. It was the first word she had spoken since the disaster, and it came out broken. "Please don't." Bianca's fingers closed around the locket. She yanked hard, the thin chain snapping easily under the pressure. The metal bit into Elena's skin as it broke, leaving a thin line of blood across her throat. Filthy. Bianca held the locket up, examining it with theatrical disgust. The crowd had gathered closer now, watching the spectacle with the detached fascination of people who had never experienced real consequence. "What is this, copper? Did you steal this from the maintenance shed?" "It was my mother's," Elena said, the words escaping before she could stop them. "Your mother had terrible taste." Bianca's smile was sharp as broken glass. She turned to face the crowd, holding the locket high like a trophy. "Ladies and gentlemen, I give you the help's idea of jewelry. Garbage clinging to garbage." With a dramatic flourish, Bianca hurled the locket into the darkness. It arced over the manicured hedges, catching the light for one brief moment before disappearing with a soft splash into the center of the estate's massive pond. The water there was deep, fed by an underground spring, and cold enough to freeze skin in minutes. "Now it's where it belongs," Bianca said, turning back to Elena. "In the muck with the rest of the trash." Elena stood perfectly still. Her hands hung at her sides, her expression empty, but something inside her chest cracked open. The locket was the last thing she had, the only physical proof she had existed before the fire. Without it, she was nobody. Nothing. She didn't see the men move. One moment, the crowd was a static tableau of expensive suits and designer gowns. The next, someone was striding past Bianca, shedding his tuxedo jacket as he walked. Julian Thorne hit the pond at a run, his dive clean and precise. The water closed over him with barely a splash. The crowd gasped in unison. Julian was a name whispered in boardrooms, a man whose restoration work had saved historical landmarks across 3 continents. Seeing him risk everything for a maid's trinket was unthinkable. Bianca's face went white with rage. "Stop him," she screamed, gesturing frantically at her security team. "He's disturbing the peace." This is my engagement. The guards moved with military efficiency, rushing the pond's edge. They were large men, trained in private security, loyal only to the Blackwood paycheck. To them, Julian was a threat to the evening's order, nothing more. Julian broke the surface, gasping, his hand closed around something small. The guards grabbed him as he tried to climb out, their hands rough on his shoulders. He twisted away, protecting whatever he had found, and the scuffle escalated. Fists flew. Someone shouted. A chair toppled into the hedge. Elena watched, frozen. A security guard shoved past her to reach Julian, his elbow connecting with her ribs. The blow sent her reeling backward, her feet slipping on the wet stone. She fell toward the fountain's edge, time slowing to a crawl as the sharp marble rim rushed up to meet her. Her head struck the stone with a dull crack. Pain exploded through her skull, white and blinding. She tumbled into the shallow basin, the soapy water closing over her face. Blood mixed with the chemicals, turning the water pink. She surfaced, choking, her vision swimming. Through the haze, she could see Julian fighting free of the guards, his movements desperate. He stumbled toward the fountain, his breathing ragged, his clothes plastered to his skin. He dropped to his knees beside her, ignoring the guards closing in again. His hands were shaking as he wiped the pond muck from the locket, revealing the metal beneath. Under the harsh lights of the estate's outdoor chandeliers, something caught the glow, microscopic engravings, precise and industrial. Julian's head turned slowly toward the mansion's cornerstone, where the estate's founding registry was carved into granite. His eyes moved between the locket and the stone, back and forth, his expression shifting from confusion to shock. He looked down at Elena, his gaze intense. When he spoke, his voice cut through the chaos with absolute clarity. "You aren't a maid," he whispered, holding the locket before her eyes. The numbers on the copper matched the cornerstone's identification code perfectly. "You're the deed." The lights inside the grand ballroom died without warning. One moment, the chandeliers blazed with crystalline fury, the next, the estate plunged into a darkness so absolute it swallowed sound. Elena's breath caught in her chest. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, she watched steel shutters slide down like guillotine blades, sealing off every glass panel with mechanical precision. "She's locking us in," Julian said, his voice low and urgent beside her. Elena's fingers tightened around the copper locket, still wet from the pond. The metal felt warm against her palm, as though it contained its own heat source. Behind them, Bianca's voice cut through the chaos of confused guests, sharp, commanding, stripped of its performative sweetness. "Security protocol. Nobody leaves until we resolve this. Incident." The word incident landed like a slap. Elena understood immediately, Bianca wasn't concerned about a disrupted party. She was quarantining the truth. Whatever identification codes were engraved on this locket, whatever connection they had to the estate's cornerstone, Bianca would burn the entire mansion down before allowing them to reach daylight. Julian's hand found Elena's elbow. "The service tunnels. Can you get us there?" Elena's mind raced through mental blueprints she'd memorized during countless shifts, the hidden arteries of the estate where servants moved unseen. She nodded once, sharp and decisive. "Follow me. Stay close." They moved through the panicked crowd, Elena using the confusion as camouflage. Guests collided in the darkness, their designer heels clicking against marble in frantic, directionless patterns. Someone shrieked about their phone losing signal. Another demanded the lights return. Elena slipped between them like smoke, her gray uniform rendering her invisible even in crisis. The velvet tapestry hung where she remembered it, a massive, gold-threaded monstrosity depicting some aristocratic hunting scene. Elena pressed her shoulder against the wall beside it, feeling for the seam she'd noticed months ago while dusting. Her fingers found the groove. She pushed hard, and a narrow wooden door swung inward with a whisper of hinges. "In. Now." Julian squeezed through the opening, and Elena followed, pulling the door shut behind them. The darkness here was different, older, honest. The air tasted of damp stone and century-old dust. Elena heard Julian's breathing beside her, measured and controlled despite the circumstances. "Can you see anything?" he asked. "I don't need to." Elena's hand found the wall, tracing the rough brick. I've cleaned these tunnels for 3 years. I could navigate them blind. They moved forward, Elena's fingers reading the texture of the walls like braille. The passages were narrow enough that their shoulders brushed the bricks on either side. Above them, the floorboards of the main estate creaked with the weight of security teams spreading through the rooms. Muffled radio chatter filtered through the ceiling, coordinates, positions, search patterns. "They're hunting us," Julian said. "They're hunting ghosts." Elena turned left at an intersection, her movements confident. "These tunnels predate the electrical system. The security cameras don't reach here. Neither do their motion sensors." The air grew warmer as they descended. Elena could feel the vibration of the estate's boiler somewhere below, a mechanical heartbeat that never stopped. Copper pipes ran along the ceiling, some scalding hot, others cold enough to burn. She guided Julian's hand to the cooler ones. "If you hear footsteps above us, strike this pipe 3 times. The steam release will cover our movement." "You've thought about this before." It wasn't a question. Elena didn't answer. She'd spent 3 years learning the estate's hidden anatomy, mapping every shortcut and blind spot. Survival required preparation. Escape routes. Contingencies. She'd never imagined using them for this purpose, but the skills translated perfectly. They emerged behind a bookshelf in the grand library through a panel disguised as decorative molding. Elena pushed it open carefully, listening for signs of occupation. The library was empty, its silence thick with the weight of leather-bound volumes and mahogany furniture. Moonlight filtered through the high clerestory windows, casting long shadows across the spiral iron staircase. "We need the founder's ledger," Julian said, moving toward the archives. "If the serial number on your locket matches the original property registration, we have proof of ownership." Elena's hands trembled as she crossed the library floor. Her mother's locket had survived the fire, the theft, the years of hiding. It had to mean something. The heavy oak door leading to the climate-controlled archive stood at the far end of the room, its brass handle gleaming dully in the moonlight. Julian positioned himself near the main entrance, his body tense. "I'll watch the door. Be fast." Elena approached the archive entrance. The handle felt cold under her palm. She turned it, heard the lock disengage with a soft click. The door swung open on silent hinges, revealing a windowless chamber lined with filing cabinets and preservation boxes. A vintage fireplace dominated the far wall, green marble, ornately carved, a relic from the 1920s. She stepped inside. The door slammed shut behind her with a violence that rattled her teeth. The sound echoed like a gunshot, absolute and final. Elena spun, her hands already reaching for the handle. It wouldn't turn. Through the thick wood, she heard Julian throwing his weight against the barrier. "Elena." His voice was muffled, distant. "It's locked from the outside." Her heart hammered against her ribs. She pressed her ear to the door, heard the mechanical click of secondary bolts engaging, multiple locks, electronic and manual, sealing her inside. This wasn't a malfunction. Someone had been watching, waiting for her to cross the threshold. The hissing started 3 seconds later. Elena turned toward the fireplace. Gas was seeping from the decorative vents, a faint sweet smell that reminded her of funeral lilies mixed with almonds. She recognized the scent from her years of research, a concentrated sedative compound, the kind used in medical procedures before modern anesthesia. But this wasn't medical. This was execution. "Julian." She pounded on the door. "There's gas." His response was immediate but barely audible. Metal scraped against metal, he was working on the lock. Elena forced herself to breathe slowly, conserving oxygen. The room was small, maybe 12 feet by 15. No windows. No ventilation beyond the poisoned fireplace. The gas would fill the space in minutes. Her vision was already softening at the edges. A metallic scrape echoed from above. Elena's gaze snapped to the ceiling, where ornate crown molding ran along the perimeter. One section shifted, revealing itself as a hatch. It swung open with a whisper of counterweights, and a figure dropped into the archive with practiced efficiency. The fixer wore tactical black gear and a gas mask that turned his face into an insectoid nightmare. In his gloved hand, a serrated combat knife caught the dim light from the corridor beyond the door. He moved with the economy of someone who'd killed before, someone who understood the science of violence. Elena backed toward the filing cabinets, her fingers searching for anything she could use as a weapon. The gas was making her thoughts sluggish, her coordination imprecise. The fixer advanced slowly, confident. He didn't speak. There was nothing to say. She grabbed a heavy archival box from the nearest shelf and hurled it at his head. He dodged easily, the box exploding against the wall in a shower of yellowed documents. Elena lunged for a brass bookend, her fingers closing around cold metal. The fixer was faster. His knife flashed toward her throat. Elena twisted, felt the blade slice through the shoulder of her uniform. The pain was bright and clarifying, burning through the sedative haze. She swung the bookend with everything she had, connecting with his ribs. The impact vibrated up her arm. He grunted, the first sound he'd made, and stumbled backward. They collided against the oak research table. Documents scattered like snow. Elena's lungs burned. Each breath brought more of the sweet poison. The fixer's gas mask gave him every advantage. She couldn't win this fight. She only needed to survive it. The door exploded inward with a crack of splintering wood. Julian burst through, his restoration tools still clutched in one hand. He tackled the fixer with the full force of his momentum, and the three of them crashed against the green marble fireplace. Elena grabbed the fixer's knife hand, slamming it repeatedly against the stone mantel until the weapon clattered free. Together, she and Julian forced the intruder down, pinning him against the hearth. Julian's hands found the gas mask, ripping it away. The face beneath was middle-aged, distinguished, familiar. Bianca's father stared up at them, his expression a mixture of shame and desperation. Blood trickled from his split lip, his expensive haircut disheveled. He was gasping for air now, the poison affecting him as the mask came off. "You," Elena whispered. Julian dragged him toward the open door, away from the gas. The patriarch of the estate, the men who'd smiled at cameras and shaken hands with governors, had climbed through a ceiling hatch to commit murder in a locked room. "Why?" Elena demanded. He coughed, his eyes watering. Fresh air from the library was slowly diluting the gas, but the sweetness lingered. When he spoke, his voice cracked with decades of buried guilt. "We didn't inherit this house. We stole it." The words hung in the air between them. Elena's fingers tightened on the locket, feeling its weight. "The fire," he continued, his voice breaking. "When the estate burned, we weren't the grieving heirs. We were neighbors. Opportunists. We found the original owners incapacitated. We forged the deed while they were presumed dead. Everything, the wealth, the legacy, the name, we took it." Julian's grip on the man's collar tightened. "You murdered for a house." "My father murdered for it." The confession spilled out like poison being purged. He set the fire deliberately. To clear the path. To ensure the estate would transition to our bloodline. I was 18. I watched the house burn. I heard the screaming. Elena's world tilted. The fire that destroyed her childhood, the flames that consumed everything, it hadn't been faulty wiring or a kitchen accident. It had been arson. Premeditated murder disguised as tragedy. "My mother," she said, her voice barely audible. "My family." Bianca's father looked at her fully for the first time, recognition dawning in his eyes. He saw past the maid's uniform, past the years of careful invisibility. He saw the child who'd survived. "Your mother didn't die." The words stopped Elena's heart. The fire was meant to be total, but it was sloppy. Someone pulled a woman from the wreckage before the authorities arrived. Not us, someone else. They took her, hid her away. We paid them to keep her silent, to erase her from history. She's alive, Elena. Your mother is still alive. Elena's legs carried her through the mansion's abandoned east wing before her mind could process the confession. Her mother was alive. Somewhere in this labyrinth of marble and lies, a woman who should have died decades ago was breathing, waiting, hidden. The words repeated in Elena's skull like a prayer, drowning out the rational voice warning her this could be another trap. Elena, slow down. Julian's voice came from behind her, strained with effort as he matched her frantic pace. We need a strategy. The nursery. Her words emerged broken, breathless. There was a note. Years ago, when I first started working here. I found it behind the wainscoting in the nursery. I thought it was old, meaningless. But the handwriting. She didn't finish. Couldn't finish. The memory of those cramped, desperate letters surfaced like drowning evidence. Find the copper key. Find me. She dismissed it as a servant's forgotten correspondence, but now the words blazed with new meaning. Her mother had left breadcrumbs, and Elena had been too broken to follow them. The corridors narrowed as they climbed. Unlike the grand staircase with its sweeping marble and crystal chandeliers, these passages were utilitarian, servant routes designed for invisibility. The walls pressed close, the air growing colder with each flight. Elena's claustrophobia stirred in her chest, a familiar tightness, but she forced herself forward. Her mother had survived worse. She could survive this. Julian maintained tactical distance behind her, his restoration tools now repurposed as weapons. She heard him checking corners, his breathing controlled despite their climbing pace. Where Elena moved on instinct and desperation, Julian moved with military precision. The contrast should have been jarring, but instead it grounded her. He was the anchor preventing her from spinning into chaos. 3 flights up, Elena said, her hand trailing along the banister. The nursery is isolated. Locked for years. They never go there. Why not? Fire damage. The words scraped her throat. The wing where it started. They sealed it off rather than restore it. Too many questions. The final landing appeared, and Elena's pace stuttered. A heavy fire door blocked their path, its surface scarred with age and heat damage. The brass plaque read, "Restricted, structural hazard." Elena's fingers found the copper locket at her throat, drawing strength from its weight. She pressed the locket against a discolored patch on the doorframe, a copper contact point disguised as oxidation. The mechanism engaged with a soft click, and the door swung inward on silent hinges. The copper circuit. The house recognized her, even if her own family hadn't. The nursery stretched before them, a tomb of charred memory. Moonlight filtered through high, narrow windows, illuminating peeling wallpaper and blistered furniture. A rocking horse stood in the corner, its paint scorched black on one side. The phantom smell of smoke clung to everything, mixed with the metallic tang of old fear. Elena moved to the massive tapestry dominating the far wall. The fabric depicted a hunting scene, aristocrats on horseback, hounds tearing into a fallen stag. She'd cleaned this tapestry countless times, her hands memorizing its weight and texture. But she'd never searched behind it. Her fingers scrambled against the cold stone, searching for irregularities. Julian positioned himself near the door, his attention split between Elena and the corridor beyond. "Company?" she asked, not pausing in her search. "Too quiet. I don't trust it." Elena's fingernail caught on metal. She traced the shape, a lever, disguised as a structural bracket. Rust flaked beneath her touch. How long had this mechanism waited? 20 years. 30. She pulled hard. Ancient gears groaned to life, the sound vibrating through the floor. A section of stone pivoted inward, revealing darkness beyond. The air rushing out smelled of grease and stale electricity, mixed with something else. Something organic and wrong. "Elena." Julian's voice held warning. She stepped toward the opening. "My mother is bait." The voice came from behind them, sharp and familiar. Elena spun. Bianca emerged from a wardrobe's shadow, the transformation absolute. Gone was the silk-clad socialite. In her place stood something harder, more dangerous. Bianca wore a charcoal tactical jacket, reinforced boots, her hair pulled into a severe knot. In her hand, a stun baton hummed with voltage. "Did you really believe we'd leave her somewhere you could find her?" Bianca's smile was surgical. We spent years crafting this moment. Every clue, every hint. We needed you to lead us here, to complete the circuit. Elena's hand tightened on the locket. You're lying. Am I? Tell me, how does a maid afford 3 years of research into property law? How does a servant accidentally stumble across restoration records? Bianca circled them, predator assessing prey. We funded your investigation. Every document you found, we placed. Every lead you followed, we laid. Julian moved between Bianca and Elena, his body a shield. What do you want? Proof. Bianca's baton traced patterns in the air. The locket is genuine, but without the vault contents, it's circumstantial. We needed Elena to open the passage from inside. Now the security footage shows her accessing restricted areas, bypassing biometrics. A thief caught red-handed. Elena's mind raced, assembling the architecture of the trap. The Vances hadn't been hiding evidence of ownership, they'd been constructing a frame. Every move she'd made had been choreographed, and she'd danced perfectly to their rhythm. Where is she? Elena's voice emerged steady, cold. My mother. Where? Bianca lunged. The attack was professional, calculated. No rage, no emotion. Bianca moved with cagefighter efficiency, the stun baton arcing toward Elena's throat. Elena ducked sideways, muscle memory from years of avoiding blows taking over. The baton connected with a porcelain doll instead, shattering it into white dust. They crashed into the rocking horse. Wood splintered. Elena grabbed Bianca's wrist, twisting hard, trying to force the weapon free. Bianca's knee drove into Elena's stomach, stealing breath. They hit the floor together, a tangle of limbs and violence. Julian moved toward them, but footsteps in the corridor froze him. Multiple sets. Heavy boots. He grabbed an oak dresser, shoving it against the door. Make it quick, he shouted. We have company. Elena and Bianca rolled across the floor, destroying decades of preserved memory. Stuffing from torn pillows filled the air like snow. Elena's training was survival and desperation. Bianca's was military-grade combat. The disparity should have ended the fight quickly. But Elena had spent 3 years memorizing every inch of this estate. She knew where the floorboards were weakest, which furniture had sharp edges, how to use the room itself as a weapon. When Bianca drove her toward the changing table, Elena reversed their momentum, slamming Bianca's spine against the corner. Bianca gasped, her grip on the baton loosening. Elena struck again, using Bianca's own weight against her. The weapon clattered away. Elena pounced, driving her forearm across Bianca's throat, pinning her to the floor. Blood from Bianca's split lip painted her teeth red. The nursery lay in ruins around them, shattered toys, torn fabric, broken memories. Elena leaned close, her voice a snarl. Where is she? Bianca laughed. The sound was wet, rattling, wrong. Oh, Elena. Still clinging to fairy tales. Tell me. There is no mother. The words emerged between laughs, each one a blade. She died 15 years ago. Pneumonia, in a facility overseas. We kept the body until it was cremated, untraceable. The note you found. I wrote it myself when I was 16. Practice for forgery class. Elena's grip loosened. The world tilted. Every hope you carried, Bianca continued, her voice strengthening despite the blood, every moment you spent searching, it was theater. We needed you functional, motivated. A dead mother makes you dangerous. A hidden mother makes you predictable. You're lying. But Elena's voice cracked. The passage doesn't lead to a cell. Bianca's smile widened. It leads to our vault. High security, triple locked. You've been standing outside it for 3 minutes, and the security system has recorded everything. Congratulations, Elena. You've just committed grand larceny. Bianca's hand moved to her sleeve. Before Elena could react, Bianca pressed something. A soft beep, barely audible. But its implications thundered through the room. Silent alarm, Bianca explained. Bypasses estate security, goes straight to the precinct. Code red robbery, violent perpetrators, officer safety threatened. The footage shows you and your accomplice breaking in with specialized tools. Sirens began their distant wail, growing closer. Julian's face went pale. The police are ours, Bianca finished. Every officer on the Blackwood detail. Every judge who signs our warrants. Every prosecutor who files our cases. The law isn't coming to investigate, Julian. It's coming to eliminate. Elena released Bianca, stumbling to her feet. The trap wasn't the nursery or the vault or even the false hope. The trap was the system itself, law enforcement weaponized, justice perverted into a private execution squad. They'd transformed Elena's search for truth into a capital crime, and the sentence would be carried out by men with badges and qualified immunity. You're fugitives now, Bianca said, rising slowly. Blood dripped from her chin onto the charred floorboards. In the house you claim to own. Wanted for crimes we invented. Running from a law we purchased. The sirens grew louder. Julian grabbed Elena's arm. We have to move. Now. Elena's gaze swept the ruined nursery one final time. This room, where she'd spent her infancy, had become the site of her final dispossession. The Vances hadn't just stolen her home, they'd stolen her past, her hope, her identity. And now they were stealing her future. She turned toward the service tunnel entrance, Julian beside her. Behind them, Bianca's laughter echoed through the charred remains of childhood. Ahead, sirens screamed promises of violence disguised as justice. Elena ran, the copper locket burning against her throat. The house whispered secrets through its walls, but she no longer had time to listen. She was a fugitive in her own home, and the walls were closing in. The great hall swallowed them whole. Elena and Julian stood in the center of the polished checkerboard marble, their backs pressed together, surrounded by a tightening noose of bodies and weapons. The heavy oak doors had been barred from the outside, she'd heard the deadbolts slide home with mechanical finality. No conventional exit remained. 6 police officers formed the inner ring, their service weapons leveled at Julian's chest. Their uniforms were crisp, their badges gleaming, but their eyes held the flat disinterest of hired muscle. Beyond them, the Vance patriarch watched with the patience of a man who'd orchestrated countless such moments. Mrs. Vance stood beside him, her porcelain face betraying nothing, her dark silk dress absorbing the chandelier light. Don't move. The lead officer's voice was professional, bored even. Hands visible. Elena's palms were slick with sweat. The law had become a weapon, and she was staring down its barrel. Julian's breathing was controlled beside her, but she could sense the tension coiling through his frame. He was calculating angles, distances, probabilities. Finding them all impossible. This is quite the audience, Bianca's voice cut through the silence, sharp and performative. She stood on the velvet-draped dais at the far end of the hall, checking her reflection in a compact mirror. Her blonde hair had been restyled, her makeup reapplied. The tactical jacket was gone, replaced by a champagne-colored dress designed for cameras. Perfect lighting. Perfect framing. A camera crew materialized from the shadows, 3 operators with professional rigs, their lenses trained on the dais. Red recording lights blinked to life. Elena understood immediately. This wasn't an arrest. It was a broadcast. Ladies and gentlemen, Bianca addressed the cameras with practiced warmth, thank you for joining this historic moment. Tonight, we celebrate not just a union of hearts, but the formal preservation of the Blackwood legacy under proper stewardship. The wedding announcement. The performance would cement legal claims, create a digital record witnessed by millions. Once Bianca spoke her vows into the global stream, no court would easily overturn the union. Public opinion would become armor. But first, Bianca's smile turned surgical, we need to address an unfortunate disruption. She descended from the dais, her heels clicking against marble. In her hand, the copper locket dangled from its broken chain. Elena's breath caught. The guards must have taken it when they'd cornered them in the tunnels. Bianca held it between manicured fingers, examining it with theatrical disgust. This piece of scrap metal, Bianca said, her voice carrying to the cameras, has caused quite the disturbance. Our former employee became attached to it. Dangerously so. Elena's hands clenched at her sides. Julian shifted beside her, protective instinct warring with tactical reality. The officer's weapons tracked his movement. "Sign the confession," Bianca said, producing a document from her assistant. "Trespassing, theft, assault. Sign it, and I'll let you walk away with this trinket. Your sad little souvenir." She applied pressure to the locket. The metal began to groan, the delicate internal mechanism straining. One of the engraved numbers started to warp. "Or," Bianca continued, squeezing harder, "I crush your past into unrecognizable debris. Your choice." The room held its breath. Elena stared at the locket, watching metal bend under Bianca's grip. The last physical proof of her identity, her family, her truth, about to be destroyed while millions watched. The ultimate humiliation. But something shifted in Elena's mind. A memory surfaced, not of fire or loss, but of her mother's workshop. The smell of solder and flux. Her mother's voice, calm and precise, "Remember, Elena. Resilience isn't about bending. It's about conducting force through the right channels." Elena had always interpreted it as emotional advice. Survive. Endure. Adapt. But her mother had been a metallurgist before the fire, an engineer who understood materials at a molecular level. She hadn't been speaking in metaphors. Resilience. Conductivity. Kappa's ability to channel electrical force without degradation. Elena's gaze swept the great hall with new understanding. The locket wasn't sentimental jewelry. It was a precision-engineered component, designed to bridge gaps in a larger system. The copper circuit. Her mother had built a key that could unlock more than doors. "Julian," Elena whispered, her voice barely audible. "The wiring behind the wainscoting. The ungrounded socket. Where?" She felt him tense, processing. He'd spent weeks complaining about the estate's electrical system, cataloging every code violation. "Northeast corner. Behind the oak panel." "Why?" "Trust me." Elena's hand found the copper cleaning rod still tucked in her apron belt, 15 inches of solid metal, worn smooth by years of use. She'd carried it through every shift, never recognizing it as the second component her mother had left her. Bianca was still monologuing to the cameras, milking the drama. The officers remained focused on Julian, perceiving him as the primary threat. Elena did the math. 12 feet to the wall. The rod would conduct instantaneously. The estate's main breaker was mechanical, ancient, it would react violently to a direct short. She lunged. The movement was sudden enough that the officers hesitated, their training warring with orders not to fire on an unarmed woman on camera. Elena crossed the distance in 4 strides, her body moving with the muscle memory of someone who'd navigated this hall in darkness countless times. The brass-plated socket was exactly where Julian had described it. Elena jammed the copper rod into the opening with every ounce of force she possessed. The arc was immediate and brilliant, a blue-white flash like lightning bottled inside stone walls. The electrical surge traveled through the rod at the speed of light, hitting the main breaker with enough force to fuse the ancient contacts. Sparks cascaded across the ceiling in a spectacular display of dying power. The great hall plunged into absolute darkness. Chaos erupted. Officers shouted conflicting orders, their voices overlapping in confusion. Someone crashed into furniture. Glass shattered. The Vances screamed commands nobody could execute. The camera's studio lights popped and hissed into silence. But Elena moved with certainty. Her feet found the edge of the Persian rug, 3 paces north. The draft from the hidden vent behind the curtain brushed her left cheek, turn east. The texture of the floorboards changed beneath her shoes, polished oak to rough stone. She didn't need eyes. She'd memorized this hall through years of cleaning, her body absorbing every measurement, every irregularity. A guard's breathing gave away his position. Elena slipped past him, her hand finding his weapon and twisting it free with practiced efficiency. The gun clattered away into darkness. She repeated the maneuver with a second officer, using confusion as her ally. She wasn't trying to harm anyone, only disarm the threat long enough to reach her destination. Her fingers found the fireplace mantel. The carved limestone was cool beneath her touch. She traced the relief of the lion's head, feeling for the anomaly hidden in plain sight. One eye was smooth stone. The other was recessed, copper-lined. A socket. Elena pressed the locket into the groove. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the copper circuit completed. Mechanical gears engaged deep within the wall, the sound grinding through stone like ancient bones awakening. A panel slid open with the weight of centuries, revealing the velvet-lined compartment behind. Her hands found the tin tube. The metal was cold, the contents solid. Original documents. Photographic proof. The truth the Vances had buried beneath layers of forgery and fire. The emergency generator kicked in, flooding the hall with harsh fluorescent light. Elena stood before the open panel, the deed held high. The evidence was undeniable, property records in her family's name, dates predating the fire, signatures proving continuous ownership. And directly in front of her, Bianca stood frozen in the camera's frame. The live stream was still running, powered by the crew's independent battery rig. Bianca's face was twisted with raw desperation, her carefully constructed mask shattered. Behind her, the comments section exploded in real time, thousands of viewers watching the Blackwood legacy disintegrate. Elena stepped into frame, holding the documents toward the lens. The daguerreotype of two young girls, one of them unmistakably a young version of Elena's mother, caught the light. The resemblance between Elena and the child in the photo was absolute. This estate, Elena said, her voice steady and clear, was built by my family. Stolen by theirs. The fire wasn't an accident. It was arson designed to erase ownership and enable fraud. The camera captured everything. Millions watched. The evidence was now public, immutable, spread across servers and screens beyond the Vances control. The police officers lowered their weapons, their faces pale. Being complicit in a cover-up was one thing. Being recorded committing it live to a global audience was career suicide. The lead officer's hand moved to his radio, his voice wooden as he requested backup, real backup, from departments the Vances didn't own. Mrs. Vance's porcelain mask finally cracked. "Turn off the cameras," she hissed. "Can't," the operator said, his hands raised. "It's live. Already archived. Already shared." Bianca stared at Elena, watching her empire collapse in real time. Her followers were abandoning her, the comment count plummeting, the subscriber counter spinning backward. Everything she'd built on stolen ground was eroding at digital speed. Elena walked toward her, the copper locket now visible against her throat, returned to its rightful place. She reached into her apron pocket and pulled out a crumpled bus ticket. The same generic, one-way fare Bianca had threatened her with countless times. "You wanted me to leave." Elena pressed the ticket into Bianca's trembling hand. "Now you can show everyone how well you travel. No name. No fortune. No filters." The Real police arrived, officers from jurisdictions beyond the Vances influence. They moved with efficient professionalism, reading rights, applying restraints. The Vance family stood in a line, their silk and diamonds suddenly looking like costumes. Mrs. Vance remained silent, calculating legal strategies. Bianca's father hung his head, decades of guilt finally visible. Bianca stared at the bus ticket in her palm, unable to comprehend a world where she wasn't the center. Julian materialized at Elena's side, his hand finding hers. His fingers were warm, solid, real. "You shorted out the entire estate," he said, mixing with exhaustion. That was insane. It was necessary. Elena looked at the copper locket, now gleaming against the gold leaf walls and the emergency lighting. The contrast was stark, humble metal against ostentatious wealth, honesty against pretension. She turned to Julian, allowing herself a small smile. "It turns out copper is a much better conductor of the truth than gold." The great hall's doors opened to the night air. The estate was still dark, its power grid destroyed, but moonlight filtered through the windows. Elena walked toward the exit with Julian beside her, her steps no longer those of a servant. Behind them, the Vances were led away in handcuffs, their private law enforcement powerless against public evidence. The house whispered its approval through copper veins and mechanical hearts. The copper circuit hummed with satisfaction, recognizing its rightful operator. Elena Blackwood had come home.